to find a seat. We're going to get started here. Just a minute. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Bridget Quincari. I'm the Chief Executive Officer here at the Hartford Public Library, and I want to welcome you to our 2018 annual meeting. Thank you so much for joining us on this rainy evening with all of the streets closed, apparently, in Hartford for the marathon. So kudos to you all for navigating and getting here to join us this evening. It's my pleasure to start off this celebration tonight. As many of you know, we've welcomed you as corporators here as part of this annual meeting. And last year, we started a new tradition for our corporators, honoring a corporator of distinction, somebody that has been a valuable ambassador and a loyal, dedicated person to our library and to the community. And we want to continue that tradition this year. And I am pleased to introduce Steve Harris, one on our board of directors, who will this year bestow our Corporator of Distinction Award. Steve.
Thank you. Good evening. When I was asked to do this, I was honored because the individual I was asked to present this award to has been a giant and a pillar in the African American community and a friend of Hartford. You know, I was thinking about the things that I could say about Mrs. Giles. Everything good about a person that you could think of, this woman embodies that. This woman embodies that. I've not known anyone who ever needed help that Mrs. Giles didn't try to help. Many times they didn't have to ask for help. She volunteered her help. She's been a pillar in the North End community. She's been an advocate for Hartford. She's also been my neighbor. And we've been neighbors for probably 50 years. And I want to say that, you know, you have neighbors and you have neighbors. But this particular neighbor is somebody that makes your day every time that you see her and you wave at her, she waves at you. So, again, I'm not going to stand here and talk about all the awards that she's received because just in this month alone, this will be her third award she's received. But I will tell you this, no matter how many awards Mrs. Giles receives, she's always the same, kind and humble. Kind and humble. And that's missing today. That's missing today. Kindness and humble. We need to get back to those things. We need to get back to being neighbors. We need to get back to when we get up in the morning as we back out of our driveways on our way to wherever we're going, and we see our neighbor, just to wave. That's the way it's supposed to be. Let's not become so jaded in our everyday lives and the things that we see going on that we forget what it means to be a good neighbor. Having said that, let me introduce to you my fabulous neighbor, Mrs. Juanita Giles. Ladies and gentlemen, Corporator of the Year, Juanita Giles.
Yes.
You got a speech going. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to thank God always for my health and strength. It is a real blessing to be honored by the Hartford Public Library tonight. It has been my joy being a part of this wonderful group. I remember my friend, Mrs. Lucy Summers, said to me that things are still worth fighting for and living for. And I thank her for it. She is the one that got me started with this library corporation many, many years ago. And she also was my neighbor. Yes. To the members of this board, keep up all of your good work. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Good job. On behalf of HTL, another one of these momentous awards for you.
Thank you.
Oh, come on.
Come out. Come out.
All right, come on. Let me get this out the way. Come on out.
All right, Andy.
There you go, Miss G. Oh, I got it. Oh, and Bridget. Okay, come on. Come on, Miss G. Yeah, we can do. Chain. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, another round of applause, please, for our 28th Corporator of Distinction, Mrs. Juanita Giles. Thank you, Steve. And now it is my pleasure to introduce somebody who really does not need an introduction to this group. We are thrilled that Louise Blaylock continues to be a part of our library family and that she is here tonight for, to present the program this evening, which is a tribute and honor to Eunice Gork. So please help me welcome Louise Blaylock.
That's a big microphone. It's great. I'm a little awed. It's good to be here at the library's annual meeting with so many supporters and friends of the library, and to take time this evening to remember Eunice Strong Rourke, library trustee, corporator, active contributor, and friend. Eunice had a long relationship with the library, beginning in her student days when she worked summers as a library page. The library was the new library then on Main Street, and Eunice would recollect just how grand and wonderful and, well, new it was. When her shift shelving books ended, she would look out the window for a certain young Tom Groark to be coming round the corner to call for her. She returned to the libraries in the 70s as a trustee, family and career now well established, and was elected vice president of the board during that time. Eunice would go on to higher offices, but she came back once again to serve the library in the late 90s and early 2000s as co-chair with Dwight Johnson of the library's capital campaign, raising well over $5 million to renovate the existing late 50s building and construct a new wing, greatly expanding the library's capacity. Eunice was a valued support to me personally in my role as chief librarian, responding with interest and enthusiasm to the library's emerging role in the city. Eunice was there for galas and celebratory moments, but she was also there for the challenges and difficulties, standing her ground and doing the right thing unfailingly. She was a champion. About this time a year ago, a glowing Eunice told me what a great summer she'd had with her family at the shore. She looked positively buoyed up, and that's how I see her in my mind, buoyant And that was her extraordinary appeal, and just how she made one feel to be around her, given that gift of buoyancy and ready to take things on. I remember Eunice with great gratitude, and I think of her with love always. And I'm pleased to welcome Connecticut's Honorable Secretary of State, Denise Merrill, to continue the tribute to Eunice Rourke. Denise.
Thank you so much, Louise, for asking me here tonight. It's a pleasure. Obviously, I'm a resident of this great city, and I love what the library has done and continues to do all these years. And I would take a minute to thank Louise for much of what has happened here over the years. She's amazing. I will tell you, she is single-handedly responsible for making sure all of we legislators in that time knew all about the Hartford Public Library. She corralled many of us to coming to many fundraisers over those years, and that's where I first got to know her myself. But I did know Eunice Rourke quite well in those old days, and I really relate to what Steve was saying about, you know, it was a different time. It was a time when people were friendlier, and we could work across the aisle, because, you know, Eunice was a Republican. I'm a pretty strong Democrat. But that didn't stop her from recruiting me on several different boards and projects she was working on. She was always looking for people to bring in. And I'd like to think I've kind of continued that tradition in a big way. I like to welcome people into our democracy, and that's how I think of the work I do with voting. She recruited me early on to be one of the first members of the board of something called the Women's Campaign School at Yale. It was our first attempt to do campaign training for women, because at that time, women didn't really want to run for office. It was very hard to talk people into it. It took me a long time to agree to run. But one of the things I learned about that was people run for office or join things generally when they're asked. It's a very simple but profound idea. And so that's what Eunice did. She asked. I didn't know her very well at the time, but I knew her to be a very genteel and lovely, but very strong woman. You know, there's a lot of talk these days about strong women, right? She was one of the originals. Underneath that very genteel exterior, she had a mind and a will that would not quit. She would fight for things that she believed in her very nice way. I wish we could get back there. I mourn those times. When I first came into politics was around 1993. And we could still all go out to dinner together and go out for drinks at the local places, you know, and we all still talked to each other. And that's when you got to know people. And it didn't mean you'd agree with them, but it meant you could talk to each other and get to know them. And so that's how I got to know Eunice. She was a force behind the Women's Campaign School at Yale in founding it. She's the one that put people together, people like me, who I was very new and young, and, well, I wasn't that young, to be honest. But I mean, I already had 3 children, and, you know, I was very involved at that point, but I was new to all this. She was already a veteran of politics. You know, she hadn't been lieutenant governor yet, but she had been around for a long time and involved in many things, particularly here in Hartford. And so I didn't know her at all. Pauline Keyser, who was then the Secretary of State, was the one that kind of brought us together. Pauline, also a Republican, I might add. And so we didn't even think about the fact that I was a Democrat and they were Republican. It just didn't matter. And that's what I really miss now. It's changed a lot since then, but she was one of those people that I think back on as part of a generation that believed in public service, really believed in public service, and getting things done was the most important thing. So she did dedicate herself, among other things, to getting more women like me involved in politics and other forms of public service, and that always impressed me. So I worked with her on that board for a while, and then she went on to other things. But I remember so well. She was quite a force. When she put her mind to something, you didn't say no to Eunice. And of course, that came out later when we came to that fateful tie vote in the Senate where she broke the tie. That cannot have been easy. Thinking back on that situation, I think it was 1991, where the income tax was at stake. And Governor Weicker had proposed it, much to many people's chagrin. It was a fierce fight. I still hear about it. I wish somebody would write the story someday of how that happened. But in the end, she was the one that had to stand up there and break that tie. And people's nerves were frayed. They had been fighting for weeks. They'd stay there all night, for night after night after night. They could not agree. And people were dug into their positions. And there it was on that night, 1818. And she was the one that broke that tie. And she will go down in history for that, because I think she did save the state that night, my opinion. And I think we're still reaping the benefits of what they did then, now. And I hope we continue to take care of people, because we need to. We cannot turn our backs on the things that we care about. And so I'll go on record as saying, I think we ought to keep that income tax in place and make it better. But I can say that I don't have a vote anymore. So sorry about that. So it's really a privilege to be here tonight with Louise and all of you, and recognizing not only Eunice and the work she did for the Women's Campaign School, which is where I knew her best, but for the entire state and all the people in it, and especially for this city of Hartford that she loved, and this library. And thank you for the work you do. This is such an important institution for this city. I see it every day. I come here quite a lot, actually. I come a lot to the naturalization ceremonies. Another great thing the library is home to, where I get to welcome in, 80 to 100 people every time into our country, and to make them voters right there on the spot. It's one of the best jobs I do. I love it so much, and I cry every time. Anyway, it's great to see you all, and thank you for honoring Eunice tonight.
Thank you, Denise. And I know that Eunice truly felt that the library was a beacon in the city, and she certainly loved the city. And apropos, Denise is giving a little of Eunice's political history. I want you to know that historian Bill Hosley is at work gathering the papers that Eunice gave at the Twilight Club over several decades. And their papers include the story of her early childhood in Falls Village, her time in the city in Corporation Council, as well as her experience as Lieutenant Governor of the state. And also papers that tell some of the story of her family's long and significant history in the city of Hartford. So I look forward to those papers being here at the library so more people can know more about Eunice Rourke and her family and their contribution. Thank you.